Welcome to Human Resources Shenanigans, or HR Shenanigans for short, the podcast where we dive into the weird, wacky, and sometimes downright unbelievable world of human resources. I'm your host, Larry, an HR generalist with more stories than I can count. In this podcast, I'll share some of the most memorable human resources stories I've encountered throughout my career. And remember, all names and locations have been changed to protect the innocent and the not so innocent. So buckle up and strap in for this first episode. I like to call this first story the case of the missing pants. And yes, that's actually happened. But before we dive in, today's episode is brought to you by James Moore, CEO of More Success, Inc. If you're looking for top tier executive recruiting services, look no further than More Success. With over 20 years of experience, they can find the candidate you need to advance your business. Now, let's get into today's shenanigan. All right, so picture this. It's a regular Tuesday afternoon at the office, and I get a frantic call from one of our managers. Let's call her Susan. Susan's practically hyperventilating, and I'm thinking, oh, great, what now? Susan says, Larry, you need to get down here right now. There's been an incident in the break room. I make my way to the break room, and what do I find, Bob? One of our longtime employees standing there in his underwear looking completely unbothered. Meanwhile, the rest of the team is trying to keep a straight face and failing miserably. It wasn't just him in his underwear, but there was a long, dark brown skid mark on the back with little green speckles. I pull Bob aside and ask, Bob, where are your pants? I literally act as if I don't see this grown man with shitty draws standing in front of me. Staying professional, I turn to Bob. So Bob looks at me dead serious and says, Larry, I was having a really tough morning, and I thought, what better way to lighten the mood than a little pants-free coffee break? Now, as much as I appreciate a good joke, we have a dress code for a reason. I had to explain to Bob that while his intentions were, let's say, creative, we couldn't have him strolling around in skivvies. He nodded, completely understanding, and simply said, fair enough, Larry. I guess I'll go get my pants back from my desk. He took his skid-stained drawers and put his pants back on. And that, folks, was another day in the life of Char. Remember, it's all fun and games until someone forgets their pants. I can't make this up. So yeah, that's the first story. Before I jump into the second story of this episode, I wanted to let you know about Resume Cheetah. If you're looking to advance your career, make a transition into management or into an executive role, or even looking for someone to help you land a job, Resume Cheetah is the place to be. Make sure you visit their website today for more details. All right, so now we're moving into the second story of this podcast. This second story is titled Snooze Control. The Tale of Tony the Tardy, a story about one of my most unforgettable encounters with a belligerent worker and his ever-defending union. So grab your coffee, unless you're Tony, and let's get into it. This all started on an average Tuesday morning. I was doing my usual rounds, ensuring everything was running smoothly at Hilarity Inc. That's when I saw Tony the Tardy, our notoriously lazy worker. Tony had perfected the art of avoiding work. If there was a way to make a 5-minute task take 5 hours, Tony had the blueprint. Now, Tony wasn't just lazy. He was an Olympic-level napper. I caught him dozing off in the break room at his desk, and once, even in the supply closet. But today was different. Today, I found Tony in the most audacious of napping spots, the CEO's office. There he was, sprawled out on the plush leather couch and snoring like a chainsaw. I couldn't believe my eyes. I snapped a quick picture because who's going to believe me otherwise, right? Then I gently woke him up. Tony, what are you doing? I asked without missing a beat. Tony replied, oh, hey, Larry, just testing the couch for comfort, in case the CEO needs a power nap. Testing the couch, right? So I wrote Tony up for sleeping on the job for what must have been the 15th time. This was it. Tony was going to face some real consequences, or so I thought. Enter Stan, the union rep extraordinaire, armed with his usual swagger and a stack of grievances. Larry, we need to talk, Stan said, plopping down in my office chair and spinning around like a bored toddler. Stan, Tony was sleeping in the CEO's office. This is serious. I said, trying to maintain my professional composure. Larry, you're blowing this out of proportion, Stan replied. Tony has a medical condition. A medical condition that makes him nap during work hours? I asked incredulously. Only during scheduled breaks, I reiterated. And if you're caught napping outside those times, it's grounds for immediate termination. Dan, sensing victory, nodded approvingly. Sounds fair. It was at this very moment I knew that I was dealing with idiots. All around me, I was surrounded by idiots. And that, dear listeners, is how I turned a serial napper into a somewhat productive employee. Tony still naps, but now it's on my terms, and the union is happy because Tony has an official title, just another day in the wild world of HR. So with this story, remember, keep calm and don't nap on the job unless you're a furniture comfort specialist. All right, keeping this train moving, we're going to get into the third and final story of this episode. But before we dive in, giving a quick thanks to the sponsor, James, and More Success Inc. If you need a recruiter to fill your vacancy, More Success Inc. is who you need to get the job done. This next story, I like to call it simply the elevator incident. All right, folks, buckle up for this one. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, and I was in the middle of the usual paperwork when my phone rang. It was the building manager, let's call him Carl, and he sounded more distressed than usual. Larry, we've got a problem, Carl said, his voice trembling. Someone relieved themselves in the elevator. I blinked a few times thinking I must have misheard. Come again, Carl.
Yeah.
He sighed. Someone urinated in the elevator, and I think it was one of your employees. So I make my way to the scene of the crime. Sure enough, there's a suspicious puddle in the corner of the elevator, and the smell is, well, let's just say it's unmistakable. I knew this was going to be one of those days. I called an emergency meeting with the building's cleaning crew and our union representative. Let's call him Mike. Now, dealing with the union can be tricky, but Mike and I had a pretty good rapport, so I was hopeful we could handle this smoothly. We reviewed the security footage, and lo and behold, there was Hank with his dick in his hand pissing in the elevator. He definitely had too much to drink. He finished, pulls his pants up, and then, well, you get the picture. Hank had always been a bit of a wild card, but this was a new low even for him. Mike shook his head, clearly disappointed. We have to handle this delicately. Larry, you know the union will want to protect their guy, but we can't have this happening. Even Mike knew this was some wild shit. I was actually in agreement with him, nodding my head. I said, agree to let's bring Hank in and get his side of the story. Honestly, I wondered what in the world he was going to say to try to get out of having his dick in his hand and pissing in an elevator on camera. So we called Hank into the conference room. He walked in looking a bit sheepish, but mostly nonchalant. I decided to cut straight to the chase. We saw the footage. Can you explain what happened and why the elevator is covered in urine? Hank sighed and rubbed his temples. Man, it was a long night. I was out with some friends, and I might have had a few too many. When I got to work this morning, I realized I really needed to go, but the elevator was taking forever. I thought I could make it, but clearly I was wrong. Mike and I exchanged a look. This was a tricky situation. On one hand, Hank clearly violated some serious workplace norms. On the other hand, the union was likely to push back on any severe disciplinary action since he had 20 years of seniority and his uncle was the vice president of the union. After a bit of back and forth, we decided on a compromise. Hank would get a written warning and be required to attend a substance abuse counseling session. Plus, he'd be on cleaning duty for a month, making sure the elevator stayed spotless. Hank agreed, somewhat relieved that he wasn't losing his job. And surprisingly, he took his new cleaning duties to heart. The elevators never looked better. So there you have it. Another day in the wild world of human resources. Remember, folks, sometimes the best solutions involve a little creativity and a lot of understanding. Thanks for listening to the one and only HR Shenanigans. If you enjoyed today's stories, be sure to subscribe for more episodes and don't forget to share and comment. Special thanks to James Moore and More Success Inc. for making this podcast possible. Until next time, keep it professional